You're new to quilting, you're very excited, you've got a pattern and it says cut some strips and then subcut. Well, what on earth does that mean? Don't worry, I've got you covered in this video. We're going to talk about what subcutting is, how to do the subcutting, and I've got my camera really close up so that you can see, and how to subcut joined strips. So stick around for that one. Who am I? I am Kim. This is Quilt with Kim, or even this is with Kim. You are very, very welcome. Let's go find out what subcutting is. Before we start, what does subcutting actually mean? Because it's one of those terms that's really common in piecing, but if you're new to quilting, how on earth are you supposed to know? Let me give you the answer. Subcutting means that you cut a strip of fabric, and this is generally how we start, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do this in a minute, so don't worry. We start with a strip of fabric of a determined length. So your pattern would say cut a 2.5 inch strip or cut a 3.5 inch strip, and then subcut into 6 3.5 inch rectangles or 6 2.5 inch squares. So the instruction for this might be cut a 2.5 inch strip. If you look at your pattern, it will say you need to cut a strip or a number of strips 2.5 inches wide in this particular example, and then subcut into 6 3.5 inch rectangles, or it could be 6 2.5 inch squares, or you could have the both with one pattern. So we're taking this strip and we're cutting it down into our triangles. So there's 6 here, there we go, 6 there, or our 6 little 2.5 inch squares. Okay, in fact, this one strip, which is a width of fabric strip, we keep it folded, by the way, I'll come on to that again in a second, actually gave me all of these. It gave me 6 3.5 inch rectangles and 6 2.5 inch squares. Okay, so that's all that subcutting means. It just means you cut a strip and you cut it down, you subcut it into smaller pieces of whatever your pattern tells you to do. All right, let's find out exactly how to do it then. The first thing that we're going to do is give ourselves a straight edge. How do we get a straight edge? Well, we keep it folded. The first thing is I'm going to get my ruler in place. We're simply going to get rid of this little strip here. So I'm putting my hand down on the ruler about in the middle, and then I'm going to cut that strip off. I'm always going to start cutting on my mat. Let me just angle that. So I'm cutting here from my mat. I'm not starting on the fabric. If you start on the fabric, you'll miss it. You won't cut the end off. But if you start on your cutting mat, you'll start that cut properly and you'll cut your fabric. So let's get the camera angled back again. I think that's dropped, just bear with. Let's cut that off. So I'm starting on the mat, and with a bit of pressure, I go right up to the end, off at the top there. Now I'm going to put my cover, my guard, on my blade, and I'm keeping my hand in place to the very last minute because I want to take this bit off first. And this is a rule for all cutting. When you cut your piece off, keep your hand and the pressure on the ruler, take your piece away and check that it comes off, because if you've cut and your rotary cutter hasn't gone all the way through and then you take it off but you've removed the ruler, it's very difficult to get it back in line again. But we're all good to go here. So I'm taking the ruler away. So I've got a nice straight edge. Now, if you remember, the bit that we want to keep is underneath the ruler. So I'm going to have to put this over to my left hand side. We've now got our straight cut on the left hand side, and as I said, we need the fabric that we want to keep underneath our ruler. So our instructions say that we have to cut a 2.5 inch strip, and that's the first thing that we need to do. So I'm going to get my ruler in position for a 2.5 inch strip. So in order to do that, if you're new to patchwork, we're going to get our horizontal line of our ruler lining up with the fold along the top. Let's see if I can get any closer. I'm getting all the thing that's holding my camera at max capacity. There is a horizontal line over the top of the ruler there. It is really lining up with that fold. And then I'm going to make sure that my 2.5 line comes all the way down here. And we really want to make sure that it is lined up properly. So can you see it's a bit out of kilter there? I'm going to zoom right in so you can see. It's not quite on the edge there. We want to make sure that it's really on the edge, and the edge of your fabric is underneath that line, and we need to make sure it's in position. Oops, all the way down. It doesn't make very exciting TV, this, does it? Okay, so you need to make sure that is straight all the way down, because accuracy is really key with patchwork. So the more time that you can spend just making sure that your ruler is in the right position as you go through, the better for you. Let's get my camera back up again. I think the stand's going, I can't cope anymore. All right, so we need to cut our 2.5-inch strip first, just like we did with when we were cutting off that edge and straightening up. We're going to keep our hands firmly on the ruler, and we're going to start cutting on the cutting mat, not on the fabric. So I'm starting on the cutting mat. I know it's off the bottom of the screen. You're going to have to bear with me on this one. Okay, I'm going all the way up till I get to the cutting mat on the other side, and that's the same rule with cutting all the way through. Before I take the pressure off my hand, I'm taking this fabric away, and if it all comes away, we're all tickety-boo and we're very happy with life. Now I can release this hand. So I'm going to get rid of that fabric because I don't need it for now. And this is where the sub-cutting comes in. We've got our strip. This is our 2.5-inch strip that I've just cut off. Now, what you do not need to do is open this up at all. No, you don't. If our instruction said cut 3.5-inch rectangles, so that means you need to cut this into 3.5-inch rectangles. And we're going to start by making sure that the edges of our strip are together. So pretty much as you've cut it off, keep all the edges beautifully lined up. All right, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit because that'll help you to see. There we go, I'm on max zoom now. And by keeping it folded, it means you can cut 2 at a time, which means if you've got loads of sub-cutting to do, you can get through it really quickly. Bit of a cheat. No, it's not a cheat, it's a hot tip. We're going to have it as a hot tip. The first thing we've got to do is take these selvages off. We don't want these. And if you look closely at the selvage, one of the selvages is, there's a white bit which is quite thin, but you can still see all the little dots. Let me hold that up. Can you see the little dots that are there? That's how it's attached to the loom. So we want to cut those off. Don't be put off by the fact that there's a thick bit one side, or wide bit one side and a thinner bit one side. We want to get rid of all of that. Let's put that back down on my cutting mat. Use your cutting mat, the lines on your cutting mat, as guides so that you know that it's sitting straight. I don't use the cutting mat to measure. I've got a whole video on why we don't want to do that, but we can use the grid lines to help us keep our fabric straight, which helps you go in a bit skew with. So the first thing we're going to do, remember when we were cutting our width, we cut off a little bit at the edge. It was this bit. And that's to give ourselves a straight edge. So we're doing a similar thing here, but we're getting rid of the self edges. Same thing here. I'm giving myself as probably about 1.5 inches here that I'm going to cut off, and that I know will get rid of these selvages and any of those little dots. I'm making sure that on my ruler I've got a horizontal line sitting at the top cut line of my fabric here, and I've got another straight line sitting down at the bottom. And it's really important that you do that, because if it's off, you'll get slightly skewy rectangles, and we don't really want that, because then you lose the accuracy as you start piecing and sewing them together. Yeah, let me move my camera down so that you can see that I've got a line. It doesn't matter which line, just a line going along the top cut edge of the fabric here. And if I look down at the bottom, you can see that if I follow this measurement line across, sorry, it's on the bottom of the screen, I can follow that measurement line across and it is on a straight line on the cut edge here. Okay, can you see that? I'm just going to hold that for a second so that you can see where my ruler is lining up. And it's really important, as I said, that we do this. Having got that in position, we are going to hold the ruler down and we're simply going to cut off those bits of selvage there. So we can get rid of those. They're pretty much not very much use to anybody unless you do any fancy selvage quilts, which you can do. They're quite creative. So we'll cut that edge off. Then, as we know, the fabric that we want is underneath our ruler. So we're going to switch it around if we're right-handed. If you're left-handed, it will all be opposite. Let's move this over here. I'm using the grid lines again just to keep myself all lined up. And then what our instructions said is subcut into 6 3.5 inch triangles. Now we can do the 3.5 inch measurement. So I'm putting my ruler on at where my 3.5 inch is. And this time I'm really going to make sure that I've got my top, a horizontal line on the top cut edge of my fabric there. I've got another horizontal line exactly as we did on when we cut the selvages off. We've got another horizontal line on the cut edge down at the bottom. Let's get that barcode out of the way. Let's do some cut edges so that you can see. And 3.5. Okay, and I'm going to zoom the camera. Right, I can't zoom it, but I'm moving the camera down. There's a lot of moving about. And let's get that out of my way. We've got horizontal line on the cut edge at the top there. You've got a horizontal line down at the bottom. Sorry, I know, let's try and move it so it's not underneath all the subtitles. So we've got that horizontal line at the bottom. So you see I'm following these little measurement lines across here. And then over on the left, I'm making sure that the cut edge is on a line. Now you can see here that the 3.5 has shuffled along a bit. So it pays to take this slowly and get the 3.5 inch, which is what we want, in position. Yeah, it happens to me too. I cut the wrong things. I cut it check it 25 times and I still get the ruler in the wrong place sometimes. Okay, so if I've shuffled it along to make sure I'm on the 3.5, I still need to make sure that, oh, has this changed? And it looks like it's gone a little bit awry. So anytime you adjust your ruler, you really want to spend time making sure that you've got straight line there, straight line down the edge, and a straight line across the bottom. And that will give you your perfect rectangle, your perfect right-angled corners, because of course when you're joining lots together, you want all those right-angled corners so you don't get any wonky blocks or wonky quilts. You may love a wonky quilt, but generally we want everything to match together, piece together beautifully, and the seams match. And your little bit of time spent here will help you enormously with that. So that's a 3.5 inch rectangle. If I'm happy with that, I'm going to hold the ruler down and I'm cutting. Okay, so that's close up. I'll do another one a little bit further away. So I've now got things popping up on my screen. 1 second, there we go. So that's 2 3.5 inch rectangles that we've cut, because if I pull these apart, you've now got 2 at a time. Can you see? There we go. But we wanted 6. So let's pull my camera out so you can see a bit better. There we go. So there's 2, and now we're going to do exactly the same thing a little bit further along my strip. So same thing again. I'm getting my 3.5 inch measurements on the left hand side. I'm making sure that I've got a nice straight edge, one of my horizontal lines on that top cutting edge there, and I've got another straight measurement line on my bottom cut edge here. And if I am happy that I've got a straight edge there, that's straight and on the 3.5 inches, and it's straight along the top, I am happy, we're good to go. I'm going to hold my ruler down. I'm going to cut up there. and that's another 2 little rectangles. So there's another 2 there. Put those up there. And then we're going to do the same thing again for our number 5 and number 6 because we wanted 6. So the pattern asked to subcut into 6 3.5-inch rectangles. So that's what we are doing. All right, same thing again, horizontal line, straight line down the edge on the 3.5 and a straight line across the bottom. If I am happy, off we go. Okay, so that is your 6 3.5, so 3.5 inches. Whoops. It's all stuck together. So 3.5 inches by 2.5-inch rectangles. Sorry, I was doing that and then you couldn't see. 3.5 by 2.5-inch rectangles, which is what your pattern has asked for. And we've got 6 of those. So we're all ready to go. Okay, next thing, what if it's squares? And it asks you to subcut into 2.5-inch squares. So it will say, cut your 2.5-inch strip and subcut into 2.5-inch squares. You do this in exactly the same way. So let's put those rectangles to one side. We know this is our 2.5-inch strip. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing, but we're going to find our 2.5 if that's what our pattern has called for. Okay, so I'll make sure it's lined up. It's lined up, it's lined up. Cut it, and there we go. However many of your squares you want, you do exactly the same way, and you can cut 2 at a time all the way through. Okay, so there's 2 of those. Now, what happens when you've got 2 strips that are joined together? How do you subcut those? Because there's a little bit of an extra technique in there that we need to have a look at. So let's go and have a look at that next. Subcutting strips joined together is actually quite a common thing. Very often the pattern will say cut 2 strips width of fabric, that's WOF. And in this case, there's 2 strips which are 2.5 inches wide. Then you need to stitch them together along the length, and then you have to subcut it. So there's another little trick with subcutting these, because you really want to make sure that it is very accurate, just like the other ones that we did. Let me take you through that. So I've joined these 2 strips together. And got beautiful Liberty there, which goes very nicely with this fabric from my stash. We're going to start exactly the same way. We're going to cut off these selvages at the end. We always want to do that. The same thing again is that we want to make sure that we have got this horizontal line on this top cut edge of our strip. First of all, I might say that when you're laying your strip out, again, use the guidelines on your cutting mat to make sure that this is all laying out straight, because it's really easy to be on the and then it will make your eyes go a little bit crazy. So just use those little guides on the cutting mat and get it all tickety-boo, as another technical term for you. Let's get our ruler straightened up. So if we look at our selvage, if there's no little dots here, little holes in the fabric, you can go fairly close, but if not, give yourselves about 1 inch to cut that selvage off. We're looking at getting a horizontal line, as I said, along that top cut edge there. We also want to do the same on the bottom edge here. So this is no different from what we've just been doing on subcutting a single strip, making sure that we've got a nice straight edge along here. Now, when we look at it closely, this edge of this fabric is just below one of these lines here, these horizontal lines. So I don't want that. I'm going to shuffle that up just a little bit to make sure that I've got my cut edge on a horizontal line all the way along here. I'm just going to move my camera up because I don't think it likes being very close to the fabric. It's throwing a bit of a wobbly on its focusing. We've got the top and we've got the bottom, but we also need to make sure that we've got this center seam all lined up as well. You're really going to work hard in making sure that all 3 areas of your your joined strip are straightened up against the horizontal lines on your ruler. It actually doesn't really matter which horizontal lines at all, you just want horizontal lines. We're making sure that that top horizontal line is nice and straight on the cutting edge. Again, we're making sure that this center seam is going on a horizontal line. So hopefully you can see here that we've got one of our horizontal measurement lines are going right across that center seam here. Can you just see at the end of my fingernails here? You want to make sure that you've got that straight as well. If we are happy with that, then we're going to cut off the selvage. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you can see that going on. I'm going to get rid of those, don't need those anymore. Now I've got a cut edge here, and I know because I've been taking time to get these horizontal lines all lined up with the ruler that this is now a right angle side of a square or a rectangle. So all I'm going to do is do the same thing again as we did on the strips. I'm going to put that underneath my left hand in my case because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, it'll end up going under your left hand, depending on which you cut with. So if you're cutting with your right hand, put this underneath your ruler on the left hand side. Now we're good to go again. So let me just say we need to, I don't know, turn these into 4.5 inch squares. We are going to do exactly the same. So we're going to get a horizontal line along that top cut edge here. We're going to get a straight vertical line down the left hand cut edge. That's where we've just cut the selvage off. And then we're going to get a horizontal line down at the bottom cut edge. And we're going to make sure that we've got a horizontal line, measurement line going along that seam. And if anything looks a little bit out of kilter, so I had one of those measurement lines was a little bit out, so I'll just exaggerate. So it was about there. So I was exaggerating, but we really want to make sure that we've got horizontal line along the top on that cut edge, a horizontal line, vertical line down on the left, and we want a horizontal line along the bottom here, and we want the horizontal line on that seam there. And say if it's slightly out, I'm exaggerating, but if it's out here, you really want to make that in a line there. Now, sometimes it can happen that you can get your top and your bottom cut edges on a horizontal line, but your center seam will be a bit out of kilter. And what I suggest is you very slowly, very carefully, those are the words I'm looking for, is just stroke your fabric into position, and you'll find that with a little bit of stroking, you can get that center seam into position in the middle there. I'm going to double check that it is the 4.5 inches that I wanted in this particular example. And if I'm happy with that, off I go. And then you do the same thing again. So that is how to subcut a joined strip. Nice and easy, but you just need to make sure that you're watching that center seam as well as your top and your bottom edges. So I hope that has helped you to subcut with confidence, both your normal strips and a joined strip as well. If it has, please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I will love you and leave you for now and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.